There's a piece of boxing equipment more important than your gloves, more important than your shoes, more important than the heavy bag itself. And almost every fighter, from the absolute beginner to people who've been training for years, is using it wrong. We're talking about hand wraps, 2 strips of cloth that stand between your knuckles and a career-ending injury. And the mistakes people make with them are so common, so universal, that they happen in nearly every gym in the world, every single day. By the end of this video, you are going to look at your own hands very differently, and you're going to understand why the boxers who never get injured all do the same handful of things that almost nobody else bothers to learn. Let's get something straight right out of the gate. The human hand was not designed for punching. It just wasn't. 27 small bones, an intricate web of tendons and ligaments, a wrist joint that bends in multiple directions, and a thumb that gets exposed the second you make a fist. Now take that delicate structure and slam it into a heavy bag 1,000 times in a single training session. The math doesn't work in your favor. Without proper wrapping, the small bones in your hand will shift on impact. Your wrist will hyperextend, your knuckles will bruise and split, and over months and years, you will develop the chronic hand problems that plague aging fighters everywhere. Hand wraps are the single most important piece of protective equipment in the sport, and the way most people use them is somewhere between sloppy and outright dangerous. So let's break down the mistakes, and then we'll get into what you should actually be using. The mistakes everyone makes. Number 1. Using the wrong type of wrap for what you're actually doing. Walk into any commercial boxing gym in America and you'll see roughly 90% of people using the same wrap for every single thing they do. Light shadow boxing, heavy bag work, pad work, sparring, technical drills, all of it gets handled by one pair of stretchy Mexican-style elastic wraps they bought once and have been using for 2 years. That is a problem. Hand wraps come in fundamentally different categories because they do fundamentally different jobs. Mexican-style elastic wraps made from a cotton and spandex blend are forgiving, conform to the shape of your hand, and feel comfortable, which is why beginners gravitate to them. Traditional cotton wraps don't stretch at all. They provide a firmer, more rigid wrap that holds its tension throughout a long session and gives your wrist far more genuine structural support. Then there's gauze and tape, the setup professional boxers actually wear into real fights, applied by a trainer using strips of medical gauze and athletic tape for the tightest, most protective fit possible. Each of these has a place. Using a soft, stretchy elastic wrap for hard, heavy bag work is like wearing dress shoes to a hike. It might work for a while, but you're not getting the support the moment really demands. Number 2. Wrong length. This one quietly destroys more hands than anything else on the list. Hand wraps come in different lengths for a reason, primarily 120 inches and 180 inches, with some traditional cotton wraps stretching to 210 inches for fighters who want maximum coverage. Most adult boxers should be using 180-inch wraps as the default. They give you enough material to make multiple passes over the knuckles, several loops around the wrist, individual finger passes for stability, and still have enough length left to tie off securely. The 120-inch wraps are for smaller hands, kids, or teenagers, and even then they're often too short to give full coverage. The problem is that almost every entry-level boxing kit sold online comes packaged with 108 or 120-inch wraps, and beginners don't know any better. They start their boxing journey wrapping their hands with material that's fundamentally too short for the job, getting maybe 1 or 2 passes over the knuckles before running out, and then they wonder why their hands hurt after every session. If you have adult-sized hands and you're using a wrap shorter than 180 inches, you are working at a disadvantage every time you train. Fix that first, before you fix anything else. Number 3. Wrong tension. This might be the single most universal mistake in the entire sport, and it goes in 2 opposite directions depending on the person. The first group wraps too tight, way too tight, white knuckle vice grip tight, because they read somewhere that tight wraps mean more support. What actually happens is that you cut off circulation to your fingers, your hands go numb within 2 rounds, your knuckles start tingling, and your fingertips literally turn purple inside the glove. If you ever look at your fingers after wrapping and they're red, swollen, or pale, you wrapped too tight. Start over. The second group does the exact opposite. They wrap so loosely that the entire wrap shifts inside the glove the second they start punching, sliding around the wrist, flopping at the knuckles, providing essentially 0 structural support. Loose hand wraps are as good as not wearing wraps at all. The wrap is flapping around your wrist mid-round, your knuckles feel no compression, and your hands are completely exposed. The correct tension is snug, firm and even pressure throughout. Your fingers should move freely. Your wrist should feel locked and supported. If you're losing feeling, loosen up. If the wrap shifts when you make a fist, tighten up. The goal is consistent, even compression from the wrist to the knuckles, with no slack anywhere in the system. Number 4. Skipping the knuckle layers. You know those red, raw, bruised, sometimes bleeding knuckles you see on people after a single heavy bag session? That isn't toughness. That is a wrap failure. Your gloves provide some protection, sure, but the actual first line of defense between your skin and the impact is the layer of wrap sitting directly over your knuckles. Most beginners make 1 or 2 quick passes over the knuckles and call it done. That isn't anywhere near enough cushioning to absorb the repeated impact of bag work or hard pad rounds. The correct technique requires at least 3 to 5 full passes over the knuckles before continuing the wrap around the rest of the hand. And for genuinely heavy bag work or hard mitt work, you go heavier than that. Some fighters double back specifically to add another 2 or 3 layers of pure knuckle padding before finishing the wrap. This is the single area where extra material pays off the most, because the knuckles are taking the direct hit of every single punch you throw. Skip those layers and you'll feel it. Skip them for years and you'll develop boxer's knuckle, chronic inflammation in the metacarpophalangeal joints that haunts retired fighters for the rest of their lives. Number 5. Under-wrapping the wrist. The wrist is the hinge behind every single punch you throw. When that hinge isn't properly stabilized, the force of impact travels backward through a joint that wasn't designed to handle it, and you end up with hyperextension, sprains, and the dreaded rolled wrist that can sideline you for weeks. One of the biggest mistakes in the entire game is treating the wrist wrap like an afterthought, doing 1 or 2 quick loops and moving on to the more visible knuckle wrap. The wrist needs multiple firm loops, ideally with the wrap returning to reinforce the joint between finger passes and after the knuckle layers are done. When you finish wrapping and make a fist, your wrist should feel actively supported, almost like wearing a brace with no ability to bend or roll on impact. If you can flex your wrist easily side to side with the wraps on, you didn't wrap the wrist enough. Go back and add more. What to actually use. Now that we've covered what people are doing wrong, let's talk about what you should actually be putting on your hands and which type of wrap belongs to which situation. Number 1. Mexican-style elastic wraps, 180 inches. This is the workhorse, the default daily training wrap that should be in every boxer's bag. The cotton and spandex blend gives you a slight stretch that conforms perfectly to the shape of your hand, which makes wrapping faster and more forgiving for people still learning the technique. They're comfortable, they're breathable enough for long sessions, and the 180-inch length gives you enough material to do everything correctly. For daily training, technique work, light bag rounds, and most pad sessions, Mexican-style elastic wraps are exactly the right tool. Brands like Tidal, Fairtex, and RevGear all make solid versions in this category, usually for somewhere between $10 and $20 a pair, which is honestly an absurdly small investment for the protection they provide. Buy 3 or 4 pairs so you can rotate them and wash them regularly, because we'll get to hygiene in a moment. Number 2. Traditional cotton wraps, 180 to 210 inches. Once you've been training for a while and you start doing genuinely hard work, you should add a pair of traditional non-stretch cotton wraps to your rotation. These don't have the give of the Mexican-style elastic, which sounds like a downside until you understand what that actually means in practice. Because they don't stretch, they hold their tension perfectly throughout a long session, they don't loosen up as you sweat, and they provide a far more rigid, structured wrap that genuinely supports the wrist like a brace. For heavy bag work, hard pad rounds, and serious training sessions, traditional cotton is the better tool. They have a slight learning curve because you can't rely on the stretch to forgive your technique. But once you get the wrap right, the difference in support is noticeable from the very first punch. Fairtex and Twins are the gold standard names here, and a quality pair of traditional cotton wraps costs roughly the same as the elastic version. The herringbone weave variations offer even more rigidity for serious fighters. Number 3. Gauze and tape. This is the professional setup, the actual wrap that gets applied before a real fight, and it's worth understanding even if you'll rarely use it yourself. Gauze and tape consists of medical-grade gauze strips combined with athletic tape, applied by a trained cornerman or trainer using a careful technique that builds a custom wrap directly on your hand. It provides the absolute tightest, most protective, most precisely fitted wrap possible. The gauze conforms perfectly to every contour, and the tape locks the entire structure in place so nothing shifts during impact. The trade-off is obvious. You can't apply it yourself, you can't reuse it, and a proper gauze and tape wrap takes someone who knows what they're doing 15 to 20 minutes to do correctly. This is fight day equipment, not daily training equipment. But if you're competing in amateur or professional bouts, you need to understand this is what your hands deserve when the stakes are real. Many gyms with serious coaches will teach you to wrap with gauze and tape for sparring sessions when you're preparing for an actual fight, and the difference in protection is genuinely substantial. Number 4. The quick wrap exception. Quick wraps, sometimes called inner gloves or speed wraps, are the slip-on neoprene shells with built-in gel padding that you can wear in roughly 5 seconds with no actual wrapping involved. There's a legitimate place for these, and there's a place where they cause real harm if you misunderstand them. The legitimate use is supplementary, for very light shadow boxing, for warm-up work, for situations where you genuinely don't need full hand and wrist support and you just want a thin layer between your skin and the glove interior. The harmful use is treating them as a replacement for real wraps during heavy training. Quick wraps do not give you the wrist support of a real wrap. They do not give you the knuckle compression of a real wrap. They are a convenience product, and using them for heavy bag work is one of the fastest ways to develop chronic hand problems. Treat them as the supplement they are, not as a shortcut to skip the actual work of wrapping properly. Number 5. The brand and hygiene reality. Let's talk briefly about which brands to actually buy, because the marketplace is flooded with garbage wraps that fall apart in a month. Fairtex, Twins, Tidal, Revgear, Hayabusa, and Rival all make consistently good wraps across the elastic and cotton categories. Stay away from no-name wraps off the cheapest corners of online retailers, because the stitching fails, the elastic dies, and the Velcro stops gripping within weeks. A quality pair of wraps from a real brand costs between $10 and $25, and they should last you 6 months to a year of regular use before the elastic gives up. And here's the part nobody talks about. Hand wraps absorb every drop of sweat from every session you do. They are bacterial wonderlands. If you aren't washing your wraps regularly, ideally after every single session, you're stewing your hands in a damp microbial soup every time you train, which is exactly how staph infections get started in combat sports. Buy enough pairs to rotate. Wash them in cold water with similar colors and air dry them. This is Gym Hygiene 101, and the number of people who never do it is genuinely depressing. The real math. So let's bring this whole thing together, because the principles underneath all of it matter more than any single wrap you buy. Hand wraps are the cheapest, simplest, most overlooked piece of equipment in the entire sport, and they are doing the heaviest protective work of anything you own. Your $300 premium gloves cannot save your hands if the wrap underneath is wrong. The padding and even the best Winninger Reyes glove is designed to work with a properly wrapped hand, supporting a stabilized wrist, cushioning protected knuckles. Without the wrap doing its job, the glove is just an expensive cushion sitting around a vulnerable, unsupported hand, and the math of repeated impact will catch up to you eventually. Here is what every experienced trainer eventually tells their fighters, and what almost nobody learns until they've already injured themselves at least once. The wrap matters more than the glove. A perfectly wrapped hand in a cheap, functional glove is far better protected than a sloppily wrapped hand inside the most expensive gloves money can buy. The wrap is the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it, and the wrap takes about 3 minutes to do correctly once you've learned the technique, which means there is genuinely no excuse for getting this wrong other than not knowing any better. The honest checklist is short. Use 180-inch wraps for adult-sized hands. Use Mexican-style elastic for daily training and traditional cotton for hard sessions. Make at least 3 to 5 passes over the knuckles before doing anything else. Lock the wrist down with multiple firm loops and reinforce it throughout the wrap. Keep the tension snug, but never numbing. Wash your wraps after every session. Replace them when the elastic dies or the seams start failing. Save gauze and tape for fight day or serious sparring prep. That's it. That's the entire system. There's no premium wrap that costs $300 and protects your hands better than a properly applied $15 Tidal elastic. There's no celebrity-endorsed signature wrap that contains some special technology your hands desperately need. Hand wraps are one of the only places in this sport where the cheap option, used correctly, is genuinely the right answer. The expensive lesson isn't about spending more. It's about caring enough to do the simple thing properly every single training session for as long as you train. Because here's the part that hits hardest. You only get one set of hands. Boxers in their 50s and 60s live with the consequences of decades of careless wrapping, of rushed sessions where they didn't bother to add the extra knuckle layers, of years where they bought the cheapest short wraps and never replaced them, of all the small mistakes that compound across thousands of training hours. The hands they punch with today are the hands they have to live with for the rest of their lives. Opening jars, holding their grandchildren, doing every ordinary task that arthritis and chronic inflammation can quietly steal away. 3 minutes of careful wrapping before every session for as long as you train. That's the entire price of admission to keeping your hands intact. So next time you reach for your wraps, slow down. Use the right type for the work. Use the right length for your hands. Make the passes count. Lock the wrist down. And remember that the most important piece of equipment in boxing was never the glove on the outside. It was always the wrap on the inside, doing the quiet work that everything else depends on.